So we got a lot of things going on over this. What truly was a Klavan-less weekend. Senator John McCain died. There was a shooting in Florida at a gaming place. And even Neil Simon died. We shouldn't let that go unmentioned. Neil Simon, one of the kind of great comedy writers of the last generation, he became obsolete as Woody Allen and irony came in on board. But he created The Odd Couple. He was one of the writers on your Show of Shows back in the day. So he was really a major force in comedy. He died at 91. But I want to talk about McCain's death. Before I talk about McCain's death and the shooting a little bit, I just want to talk about the reaction to it, because I'm sure you're listening to other shows. I'm sure you've heard the news. You know who John McCain is. You know he died. It is a sad thing. The man was a patriot and a hero, no question about it. It is sad when a man like that passes. He was in his 80s. He said he had been blessed with a life full of blessings, certainly a life of importance and fulfillment. And so, he said himself that this was, death comes, nobody gets out of here alive, as he said. And I think that we understand that. So I don't think I have to talk that much about that. But what I do want to talk about is the structure of our reaction. A lot of times when I go around talking to conservatives, trying to get them more interested in the culture, because I feel the culture affects attitudes over the course of 20 years down the line. And when you get to that place, and it's all a big emergency because people are voting for a president who says he's going to fundamentally transform the greatest country on earth, it's too late. It's too late to change things. So you got to get involved in the culture. Now, one of the things I always tell people is that conservative culture doesn't look like conservative life. In conservative life, you try to be true to your wife, you try to do the right thing. But sometimes when you're watching the culture, a show about a gangster like The Sopranos can show those values in operation by showing the opposite of those values at work. And one of the points I always make about The Sopranos is that David Chase, who created The Sopranos, had worked in TV all his life. And I think that he understood that the structure of a TV story is different than the structure of all other stories, the classical Western story. In the classical Western story, a man enters a situation or a woman enters a situation that is perfectly designed to touch at his personal tragic flaws or comic peccadillos. And because of that, the situation goes through an arc in which the character is in some way transformed or simply killed by the situation that he's in this unique way that somehow speaks into the heart of all people. But what David Chase understood is that the television show actually has a television series actually has a structure that's more like life. In a television series, the person remains the same, but the events change. So he keeps doing the same thing over and over again. If he's a detective, he solves crimes. If he's a dad in a situation comedy, he deals with hilarious family upsets. But the thing goes on and on again, and it's just the same person, never changing, always doing the same thing. I think it occurred to David Chase that this is hell. This is what hell looks like. You're always the same, and you're always doing the same things over and over again. And that is why he put Tony Soprano, this evil gangster, into hell. And I think it's a very moral show because of that. But when I look at social media and when I look at the news media reacting to an event like Senator McCain's death, I feel like I'm in hell. I feel like America has now entered a social media and news media hell where every event just repeats the same pattern again and again. A man like McCain dies. We all know that over and above our disagreements with him, over and above personal traits that we might have disliked, over and above the mistakes he made, there was a man. Here was an American man. And to say somebody is an American man is high praise. To say somebody is a man who operated as a man and as an American at the same time for all of his life, that to me is high praise because what America stands for and what McCain stands for. So what's your immediate reaction? He dies. You didn't know him. You're not grieving in your heart, but you send out a tweet that says, R.I.P. Senator McCain, right? And that message lasts for 5 minutes on Twitter or on Facebook, people saying respectful things and goodbye to this guy. And then the politics start, and it's always the same thing. There are a couple of people who climb out from under the rocks and start saying, no, not R.I.P., he'll burn in hell. Okay, those are the people who climb up from under the rocks. Those are one thing. But it's then the other people who start using their tribute to McCain as a way to show that other people are not paying tribute to McCain in quite the way they should be. Or they want to show you how McCain was something that Donald Trump is not. Now, that's mostly on the left. What they do, on the left, the only good Republican is a dead Republican. They hate Ronald Reagan. They hate George W. Bush. He's a Nazi. They hated John McCain. They called him racist. They called him old. They always loved him when he wasn't running against one of theirs, because then he was kind of a moderate Republican who would cross the aisle, who did do things that drove the right crazy. He was not a big right winger. He was not a big conservative, except in very small ways, but he was always annoying the base, and so the left loved him for that. But the minute he was running against Barack Obama, oh, how old he was. He was so old. And wasn't that a racist, whistle? And now suddenly he's dead. If only the Republicans were like John McCain. What a wonderful American he was. And so they used the guy's death immediately as a political attack. And then, of course, the people on the other side start saying, on our side, they start saying, hey, wait a minute. You're praising him now because he's dead, but you didn't praise him when he was alive. Let me tweet your news story where you said this. I mean, Don Lemon especially was like, he was, that thing Don Lemon does where he's so sincere and so, and now he was one of the guys saying, the question about John McCain is, wasn't he really a racist? Wasn't he really, starting this racist thing? So the guy's death becomes a political battleground. And I personally feel that if I send out a tweet saying what I would normally say, which is, an American man, a big loss, R.I.P. Senator McCain, I feel like I'm virtue signaling. I feel like I'm saying, see, folks, this is how it's done, and you stink. So you cannot even return to the normal ways we would approach death. Here's the thing about death. Okay. Death is appalling. If you don't know this, it's because you're young. Young people don't have to know this, but because they don't know it, they should be reading great work. They should read the newspaper, but they should also be reading Shakespeare. They should also be reading the Greek tragedy. You got to learn that this is what life is about. Life, just like Donald Trump doesn't take place in a world that doesn't have Democrats in it. He's part of a world that has other things. Life takes place in the shadow of appalling death. It completely erases people from the face of the earth. And that's appalling. And so when we see death, and when we realize death is our common goal, we stop a minute. There's nothing wrong with stopping a minute and saying, let us take the best look at this man's life, because when we go, and guess what? We want people to do that for us, because we all make mistakes. We all have people who hate us. Just a minute to pause. And it's not, here's a time, what I think about the mainstream media, how corrupt I think they are. But here's a place where I feel that the people who attacked Senator McCain on political grounds and then praised him at his death were not doing anything wrong. I had a friend, a next door neighbor, and we were good friends, and we would play tennis together. And he was a liberal, and we would fight like cats and dogs. In fact, cats and dogs had nothing on us. I mean, we would scream, and he would come over at my house, and I would go over to his house. We would sit at the dinner table, and we would scream at each other. I remember once getting so angry, I actually slapped the table with my hand at a dinner. This is a dinner. This is over a civilized dinner. And then at some point in the conversation, every single time, we would stop, we would calm down, we would raise a glass, and we would say, praise God, we live in a country where you and I can sit and say these things to one another and still be friends, and nobody comes and tells us what to say. And that was that was a big part of our relationship. And it was good for both of us to hear the other side from somebody we respected and liked. My friend got cancer, and it wasn't just cancer, it was a death sentence. They told him, you got a year, that's it, it's over. And I would still see him, I'd still invite him over, and we'd bump into each other even as he got too weak to visit. And he would still try to start political arguments with me, and I couldn't argue with him. I couldn't do it because I just felt, you're dying. Don't think about this anymore. You're leaving this behind. And when he died, I realized I was wrong. I should have argued with him, because as long as you're alive, you're in the fight. As long as you're alive, you are in the fight. It is right to fight. I mean, it's dead people who stop fighting. Living people have to fight for what they think is right, what they think is good. So I have nothing against the left for saying that, I hate McCain, or I like McCain when he's not running against Obama and all this, and then praising him. And I got nothing against people who said, like me, I disagreed with a lot of what John McCain did. I thought he made life too personal, politics too personal. I thought he was wrong to come and vote against the repeal of Obamacare when he ran on the repeal of Obamacare. I thought McCain-Feingold was an atrocity and all this. But I realized that when this guy dies, you stop for a minute and remember what he was. Let's go back to his acceptance of the nomination when he was running for president. And he talked about how he got caught in how he was captured in Vietnam. And they came to him and they offered him his release because his father was an important admiral, and they knew it would be good politics to offer him a release. Here is John McCain. John McCain stood up and he talked about the fact that they came to him and they said, we'll let you go. And he said, the rule is that I will not go until you let the people who were captured before me go. I mean, that's an amazing thing to have said. And he stayed. And after that, they started to just absolutely brutalize him.
I was in solitary confinement when my captors offered to release me. I knew why. If I went home, they would use it as propaganda to demoralize my fellow prisoners. Our code said we could only go home in the order of our capture, and there were men who had been shot down long before me. I thought about it, though. I wasn't in great shape, and I missed everything about America, but I turned it down. A lot of prisoners had it a lot worse than I did. I'd been mistreated before, but not as badly as many others. I always liked to strut a little after I'd been roughed up, to show the other guys I was tough enough to take it. But after I turned down their offer, they worked me over harder than they ever had before, for a long time, and they broke me. When they brought me back to my cell, I was hurt and ashamed, and I didn't know how I could face my fellow prisoners. The good man in the cell next door to me, my friend Bob Craner, saved me. Through taps on a wall, he told me I had fought as hard as I could. No man can always stand alone. And then he told me to get back up and fight again for my country and for the men I had the honor to serve with, because every day they fought for me.
This is an act of insane courage and insane patriotism. And he says that he learned to love America in another country's prison. He said after that moment, after he had sacrificed himself, his life was no longer his own. It belonged to America. And that's an amazing, when somebody says that, when people got all upset at Donald Trump for saying, I prefer my war heroes to have not been captured or whatever it was he said. That's why they said that. They said it because they said it because that was a small, mean thing to say. But this is not the time. The New York Times op-ed, all they had in that op-ed were just relentless attacks on Donald Trump. This isn't even the time to remember what Donald Trump said. It's not that time. It is not that time. Now is the time to sit and remember who McCain was and what he did. And that's so simple. It's so simple. But we can't do it. And the same is true in this shooting that took place. They're playing video games in a contest in Florida. They're playing Madden, so it's not a violent video game. There's nothing like this going on. And one of the kids who was playing, or he wasn't a kid, he was a young man, was playing. He lost. He went home, got a gun, and opened fire, killed 2 people, wounded 10 or 11, I think. Still, how the numbers haven't quite come in. And immediately we do the same thing. Thoughts and prayers. Oh, thoughts and prayers aren't enough. You need, gun reform. Well, guns aren't the point. Well, we've got to do it right now while everybody's panicked and we'll make mistakes. This is not the time. Yes, this is the time. And of course, Dana Lash. It's like everybody on earth has to call Dana Lash a word I can't even indicate on this program. They just come out with this. Dana Lash puts out a screenshot of people saying the only way these people learn, meaning NRA supporters learn, is if it affects them directly. So if Dana Lash has to have her children murdered before she'll understand, I guess that's what needs to happen. Dana Lash's children have to be murdered. This is on Twitter. So she writes to Twitter and says, my children were threatened on Twitter. And Twitter says, yeah, this doesn't violate our standards. It doesn't violate our standards. Alex Jones violates their standards because they did eventually start to delay him. They didn't totally pull him down. But so it's like hell. It's the same thing repeating over and over again. It's every time there's a shooting. It's every time a prominent person dies. We have to watch this charade go on where we descend into this rage and hatred. I mean, it's not healthy. It's not good. It's not a good thing for us to be doing. Again, we should be fighting. We should be fighting because we disagree, but we should be able to stop just for a minute, just for a day, one day. The world is not going to go away in a day. All our troubles will still be here tomorrow if we take a minute and salute the guy. You know, I mean, all our troubles will still be here tomorrow if we take a minute and say, thoughts and prayers for the people who were killed in Florida. You know, that's all it takes. That's all it takes. And this hell. So why are we in hell? Why are we stuck in this round? And I think the reason is actually pretty simple. I think it's because we aren't talking about the thing we actually disagree about, which is the baseline of our disagreement. One side believes in what America was made to be, what it was made by the founders to be. Very simple, very simple. The founders said, we want people to be free. We don't want them taxed without representation. We don't want them told what to do by distant rulers who don't have their interests at heart. How do we do that? Knowing that men are not angels, knowing that they need a government, knowing that people in power want more power, knowing that government grows. How do we stop it from consuming this moment of freedom that is created as if by God on the planet, this moment when we can invent individual freedom? And they did it by inventing this kind of Rube Goldberg. Does anybody remember what a Rube Goldberg machine is? Yeah, okay, it's like Mousetrap, that game Mousetrap, where one thing knocks over another. They invented this Rube Goldberg machine to keep freedom alive, have the bases of power fighting with each other, have the judiciary ruling over them, you know, whether things are constitution, have the Constitution guide all and protect the minority, have the president have certain powers, but only certain powers, have the federal government have powers and the state have powers, make sure everybody has guns so they can kill each other if they disagree. You know, that is basically this kind of rickety old machine that they built that has worked for over 200 years amazingly. I mean, it is the longest lasting constitution on the face of the planet. So one side is saying, you know, I mean, this is why when it comes to the Supreme Court, it is not a fair argument. One side is saying we want our Supreme Court guys to go in there and give us rights to abortion and to give us rights to gay marriage. And the other side is saying, hey, that's not the question. The question is, will you do your job in the Rube Goldberg machine? Will you do your little piece and knock over the marble that flows down here so we can make the laws in our localities, but you will keep the machine alive by upholding the Constitution? That's the difference between us. And if we're not talking about that difference, we're not talking about anything. If we're talking about abortion, we don't agree on abortion. I get it. But do we agree on the Supreme Court's role on abortion? That's the question that we're never talking about. The other side is saying we want to fundamentally transform this country. We want to, you know, here's a perfect example. All these socialists who are springing up on the ignorant left, these idiots like Alexandria Google Eyes Cortez, who just, like, every time she opens her mouth, I sit there going like, you know, girl, go to college. I mean, get a degree in something other than leftism, because you don't know what you're talking about. Let's say we agree on capitalism. Why? Because capitalism keeps us free. I make something, you choose whether you want to give me money for it or not. Very simple. The government doesn't tell you what it should cost. We agree between each other what it should cost. It keeps people free. It's free markets with free choices. That's why we love it. And it only works if you leave, and it protects your right to property, which is your property is the result of your time. Your time is what your life is made of. So it protects the right to property. If we agree on that and we say, you know what, we can do so much good by a little social spending that we're going to violate the rules of capitalism to have a little bit of welfare, a little bit of programs that get people out of the, you know, just a couple of things. And we say, well, that does violate our principles, but maybe just to all get along, and maybe because it'll do some good, maybe we'll agree to some of that social spending to keep capitalism alive. If we both agree that capitalism is the baseline, then we're arguing about how much can we have before we start to damage capitalism. How much good can we do by violating the principle of your property rights? I'm taking your earned property away and saying that I know how to spend it better than you. That's a form of slavery, right? The state is saying, give me that money that you earned and I'm going to spend it because you would just spend it on a restaurant or a local business or give it to charity. But no, I'm the expert. I know better than you and I'm going to do this. when we argue in those terms, when we both agree on the baseline, we can have that argument. We can make some compromises. I'll stand down a little bit. I won't be absolute about my principles because we're all living in the same country. But when you tell me, when I know that your ultimate goal is to destroy the free market system, then every single thing you say is a step toward that goal, and I will have none of it. If I know that you want to take guns away so I can no longer defend my freedom from my home, every single restriction you want, whether it's on bump stocks, whether it's on bazookas, whether it's on nuclear weapons, every single step you take is wrong. See, if you say, you know what, I favor the Second Amendment, I will write it down, I will never stop favoring the Second Amendment, you have the right, here's a reason why there might be a restriction, then maybe we can talk. But how can we talk? How can we have a conversation if I know you are trying to destroy the very system that gave us everything that we have? If you're trying to destroy the capitalism, if you're trying to destroy the gun rights, if you're trying to destroy the First Amendment, which is the big one for me, Donald Trump can pay off the entire Rockettes if he wants. If you are not for the First Amendment, if you're Facebook and you're taking down Dennis Prager, if you're Google and you're putting all the liberal answers to have them all come up first in your algorithm, if you are the Democrats and voting to rewrite the First Amendment, if you're the mainstream media and you are lying every single day in order to keep conservative voices off the air and demonize them, Donald Trump can sleep with every single Rockette and pay him off, and I don't give a damn. So we have nothing to talk about because we're not talking about the thing we disagree on. We're not, I can sit with all kinds of liberals and have all kinds of discussions. I was talking about my late friend and how we'd have these discussions because we love the country. We love what the country was. We were arguing to make the country its best self as the founders imagined it. If at any point he had said to me, what we really need to be is socialist, we wouldn't have been able to just talk about it anymore. We would have just played tennis.